The Bible, the story of God, is broken down into four acts. If you were to think of it as a story, that there are four acts or four movements or four phases, if you will, that are described. If you think of this idea of God being in a constant process of rescuing us, it's almost looking at it like I took a class, life-saving, one time. And so I took this life-saving class to be a lifeguard. Thank goodness I didn't do it. But anyway, because I wasn't that good. But in that class, one of the first things you do is you have to recognize that that person who needs rescue is going to do everything they can to try to rescue themselves. So you have to get their attention. You have to get them to calm down if you can. And you have to be able to get them to start listening to you. And so when we think of brokenness and we think of creation, in that first phase of God rescuing us, it's a phase in which God is trying to make us aware of our need to be rescued. And so we kind of see that kind of playing out as we move through these different stages. So today we're moving in an illustration or a stage of promise and law. And these words, are, if you notice them as we go through, are a contrasting between God in this relationship and us in this relationship. God was creation, perfection. We were brokenness in our sin. Now we look at the promise, and then we look at the law. God in His promise and us in His law. And to kind of move into this, I want to read to you a vow that was given on one of the weddings that I had done. And I'll leave out the names so anybody would not be concerned they know. But this is what the vow was said. I take you to be my husband or wife, my partner in life, and my one true love. I will cherish our union and love you more each day than I did the day before. I will trust you and respect you, laugh with you and cry with you, loving you faithfully through good times and bad, regardless of the obstacles we may face together. I give you my hand, my heart, and my love from this day forward for as long as we both shall live. Now, does anyone here think maybe they shot too high? It's like, man, you just gave every dollar in your wallet when you could have maybe cut back a little bit. Maybe the vow should have been, I will love you one day a week. I will, or maybe, in the end here it talks about, I'll give you my hand and my heart and my love from this day forward for as long as we both shall bid. Well, if they would tweak that, he could have said, until something better comes along. And of course, who wouldn't have been, excited about that kind of vow and relationship in a marriage? Well, of course, we know that there's no way that you could downsize that thing and really be any kind of a meaningful relationship at all. Well, the reason I say that is because that's what promise and law are being described to. If you know, and we've talked about this in the past, that the whole imagery of promise and law was an image of a wedding, and that there are many subtle distinctions going through the passages of how God had set up this relationship that are similar to what the Jewish law was like, or the Jewish marriage ceremony was like. That God, in fact, was reciting a vow, and we were reciting a vow to God that was defining this new relationship that God had intended in this rescuing us back. Because this rescue, coming from creation to brokenness, is now a rescue bringing us back into a relationship the way God intended it back in the beginning. But in this particular vow, if you will, or this promise and law, it's not the mutual one where you have two loving people totally engaged and seeking this mutual relationship. In fact, as we go through this in Genesis, from where we talked about the brokenness, if you look for the first 11 chapters of Genesis, it spans through 20 generations and 1,600 years. And through all of that, we see the same thing. God sets us up as best in His plan, and left to our own end, we pretty much drift and destroy it. We see that God, that from Adam and Eve, when they first were, the sin first came in, that the very first murder existed between their own children. We go on and see through the stories that go on from Adam and Eve, it moves quickly over to the story of Noah, where mankind had made a name for himself. And as a result, God saw this and the evil that existed, and He destroyed the world that exists, with the exception of Noah and his family. And then we got a new relationship. Okay, He's got a people that are now following God, but then over the course of the years that go on from there, from Noah, we see a continual drifting away from God, coming to the point in chapter 11 where we have the Tower of Babel, where what it says is that people wanted to make a name for themselves. So let's build this huge tower. And so God sees it, and once again, they're focused on themselves and not on God. The brokenness of wanting to be like God. That's what started it, remember in there? The brokenness of being separated from God and going to our own end. And as a result, God confuses their language and scatters them throughout the world. Every one of these, as we look through these first 11 chapters, we really to see how that God has set mankind up and then left to our own end, and without God's visual interaction or intentional moving of us, we drift away from God. Some would say, I've heard people say, well, it's a story where God tried this, that didn't work. God tried that didn't work. God tried that. That's not it at all. Really what we see is, like I said in the rescue, is there's an imagery of how God has given us 1,600 years to realize, even for us as human beings, that look at, in all those people in 1,600 years, they continue to screw up. Maybe I, left to my own end, will screw up. Maybe we realize that, we need to be rescued, that it is not within our own ability to be rescued, to rescue ourselves. And so then we move into chapter 12, where the promise comes out that in this particular chapter, God changes things, and He moves into a new phase where what He now intentionally moves into the life of one individual, Abram, and He establishes a relationship. There wasn't anything special about Abram. I mean, he followed God, we can assume, based on his reaction and how he did. But there were many things about Abram we know, that he was not perfect and he had his own issues and stuff. And yet, it says in here, let's go into chapter 12, starting at verse 1, it says, as the Lord had said to Abram, leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land that I will show you. And then verse 2, this is the promise. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be blessed. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. So Abraham obeyed and followed God, is what the passage says. That's the promise, the vow that God had made to Abraham. That's the beginning of this relationship being established, where God states His vow to these people, to Abraham and to the people that follow. It wasn't a flippant vow. It wasn't one of these things, I'll get to that. When I tell my daughter to go fill this fountain, and she's, okay, Dad, I will. And it's like, okay, that's a promise that's 50-50 if it happens. She's a good kid, so I should say she does it most of the time. But we all do that. We make a promise, but we really don't think about it. That's not what this was. This was a promise that was established with a covenant. A covenant was an agreement, a binding agreement between two parties. And so God made this promise, but He made it more than just a promise. And so what we see is, if we move over, it becomes more clear when you move over to chapter 15. Actually, this is now a span of 12 years. God had said He's going to make a great nation out of, I should say, if you don't know the story, Abram and his wife were barren. His wife was barren, couldn't have kids. So here's a guy who's had this God. He was 70-something at the time, 75 when God made this promise to him. And he's believing Him, but he's thinking, okay, but I don't have a whole lot of kids to start raising a nation from. And so 12 years go by, and we come to chapter 15. And in this chapter, Abraham, it says, has a vision. In this vision, God tells to him, don't be afraid, you're a shield, you're my great reward. And Abraham, he responds to God by saying, look, I'm childless. How can I possibly build this promise you had? I'm going to have to give it to one of my workers, basically. And then verse 4, God says this, the word of the Lord came to him, this man will not be your heir, referring to his servant. But a son coming from your own body will be your heir. He took him outside and he said, look up at the heavens and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. Then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. In verse 6, Abraham believed the Lord, and He credited it to him as righteousness. Just on a side note, verse 6, because some people will ask the question, how do people before Jesus get saved?